Coming up on Over a Barrel, we've got some refinery problems. Let's talk about this, and it's creating some problems.
You know, this is always the issue that we talk about, right? The caveats are always hurricanes or refineries, and now we've got one of them.
Over a Barrel starts right now. Welcome to Over a Barrel. I'm Matt McClain. The other guy's Patrick DeHaan. Thanks so much for joining us. And let me tell you, we have got a jam-packed episode. Everything under the sun's going on right now out in the world. And Patrick is smiling because he knows we have a lot to discuss and just a little bit of time to discuss it in. So Patrick, how are you, sir?
Well, I'm good, Matt. Hopefully you've been well. I was always laughing because it's like, well, you know, we hopefully, you know, that's why people listen to us, is because we love to jam pack these full of content.
Absolutely.
So, never a shortage of things to talk about and new issues to educate folks on. And we have one today. I'm kind of excited to talk about it.
Yeah, let's get right into it. We will get into, by the way, if you are listening to this podcast, like, subscribe, do all of that stuff. We want you to see those notifications, and we hope you want to see those notifications of when we send out a new episode. We don't send them out often. You don't get,
share, like, tell your friends and family, get on the bus.
All of that. And we don't bug the daylights out of you. You're not going to get alerts like every 5 minutes or anything like that. It's like once a week. So it's not anything that's too intrusive on your life.
That's
and
right.
then special occasions as well. Obviously, if there's something breaking happen, but you'll probably want to know about it, and we'll be here. So just do all of that for us if you would. And then let's get right on into what Patrick was about to discuss, which I already have a little bit of a lead-in knowledge about. Patrick, we've got some refinery problems. Let's talk about this. And it's creating some problems.
You know, this is always the issue that we talk about, right? The caveats are always hurricanes or refineries. And now we've got one of them, at least for some area of the country. But this is going to be a lesson that everyone can really digest, and that makes sense for everyone. We've seen a lot of media coverage of what we call flaring, right? When you go by a big refinery, when there's visible flames coming out of the top, it's not a good sign. So let's, this episode we'll concentrate on what flaring is, what it means, the things that aren't good, all of that. And obviously we had an event this week just outside Chicago. So naturally I'm a little bit more interested. And then folks in California, I feel like they have a lot of refinery issues, but this really applies to everyone. That is, when you see this happening at a refinery, it's generally not a good thing. So let's get into it here. Obviously, Monday, for those that don't know, there was a lot of severe weather in Chicago. Now, severe weather tends to be very localized, but happens this time around that it was very, very localized to one of the larger refineries in Chicago. Let's take a look at some of the graphics here that I pulled up. And this is the problem, Matt.
Oh, no. I know what those are. Those are the big transmission power lines.
That's metal spaghetti right there.
Yes,
that's what that is. It's metal spaghetti. It doesn't look good. This is a photo from some of the transmission towers. These are incredible transmission towers that carry high voltage, right? I think we're all familiar with seeing these across areas, especially in the country. This refinery outside of Chicago is kind of out in the country, as I found out. Mm-hmm. But this happened in very, very close proximity to one of the largest refineries here. You can see the power wires here, Matt, going across. And you'll notice right in the backdrop is the ExxonMobil refinery that is in South Chicago. We call this area Joliet or Shanahan.
Part of Chicagoland.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So what happened, Matt, was something that's pretty rare. Well, at least in proximity, the power lines right next to the refinery obviously went down, the transmission lines, the area that's serving it. And look at that. You had choppers coming in here to try and get coverage of exactly this tower. It's a mess.
Yeah.
So this refinery lost complete power, which is pretty rare. Usually, when something like that happens, for those of us in Chicago, we saw this winter. This is what is flaring. This is not from ExxonMobil. This was over the winter. This is from BP in Northwest Indiana. But this is indicative of a very big problem here at a refinery when this is happening. Essentially what flaring is, Matt, is when things don't go smoothly at a refinery, all of the built up pressure, keep in mind refineries operate under a lot of heat. Essentially what refining is, Matt, is it's superheating crude oil to crack the crude oil into different forms, right? You refine crude oil, you heat it up, you have a distillation tower, Matt, and the heavier products stay on the bottom. The lighter products, as you heat it up, rise to the top, right? So things like naphtha, gasoline, the heavier products go to the top of the distillation tower. The
And like
heavier
the jet
products like
fuel and other stuff, which is
asphalt,
heavier. Yeah.
yeah,
And the asphalt.
asphalt, bunker oil, really heavy oils stay towards the bottom. Diesel, jet fuels, kind of the middle of the distillation tower. Like I said, gasoline's on the top. So when you see a picture like this here with multiple flare stacks just going crazy, and by the way, if we look into this, that's an interesting. I didn't notice that before. Look at this.
Oh.
I don't know what's going
Oh.
on there, but hopefully that's not like raw gasoline that backed up and is just shooting into the air. I can't imagine it is. Maybe that's just water suppression system.
Paul, let's
Um,
hope. Yeah.
yeah, but essentially this is problematic. And so now using this, and these are the flare stacks, Matt. These are burning off the excess pressure. And why this is happening is could be multi-purpose that this is happening. There could have been a loss of steam pressure. There could have been a loss of power. There could have been a transformer failure. A lot of things that disrupt the process. By the way, this is similar in refinery nature to a computer. And Matt, I'm going to throw this event here that a lot of Americans that are listening, the blue screen of death that is happening because of the Microsoft slash crowd strike outage.
Yup.
That could theoretically impact a refinery to the point where if they lose control of the refining process, this is what happens. This is actually a safety feature that we're looking at here.
I see.
Instead of something actually blowing up under tremendous pressure, the pressure is being released to the air and it's being burned off. So these are hydrocarbons that are being burned because you don't want raw products in the air. Things like benzene are toxic. You have to burn them so that they're less toxic.
So basically, we are watching dollars go up in
Yes,
smoke.
BP is watching dollars burn away here, but
Gotcha.
that's better than a
Catastrophic situation.
Exactly. This led to evacuations, by the way, because this is, as you look here, this is borderline uncontrolled flaring, which is not good, but it's the safest way for this event to happen. Is all of that pressure, Matt, all of these hydrocarbons, the pressure is being released. I don't know if I worked at a restaurant and we had a pressure cooker, right? It operates under pressure, cooks much faster. But when there's something bad that happens, Matt, all that pressure that's built up has to go somewhere. And in the case of a refinery, this is where it goes. It's burned off. So getting back to what happened to Joliet, and by the way, this is another view of that BP refining flaring that happened over this winter. This is pretty wild. So taking what we know, and now here is the Joliet refinery. I got this footage yesterday. I went down to this refinery since I'm in Chicago. And,
You shot this footage.
I did. Looks pretty peaceful. By the way, here are the transmission lines that cross the interstate. And again, there was a tornado that led to that transmission structure basically crumbling. Now, if we zoom in here, we can see two flares. Thankfully, they're not very active. But again, this was yesterday. The refinery has not had power since Monday night is when the tornado knocked the power out. So it's not surprising, Matt. Normally, right after that would happen, you'd probably see much more of an active flare here. There are two flare stacks that are visible here. And so when the power is lost, these probably would be a much brighter, more visible flame. But because this was happening yesterday, they've been without power for several days. So this is probably just residual pressure being burned off.
Gotcha.
Or this could be a sign that power is returning to the refinery and they are starting to get processes going. Now, think of it, Matt, this way. When they get this refinery going, so refineries operate under a lot of heat, right? It's kind of like your oven. What happens when your oven goes off for several days? It's totally cold, right? Your oven's going to have to preheat again because what you're baking in the oven's pizza. What a refinery is baking is oil. They're essentially boiling oil. So after they get power back, they have to reheat. Everything has to heat back up to get operable again. So what we could be seeing here is either residual flaring because they may still not have power and there may be some pressure, or they've gotten some electricity back and they could be trying to get the the restart process going. So why all of this matters, Matt, is because when a refinery flares, it's indicative of a major problem. And
Yeah.
it means that that refinery is probably having an impact to gasoline production. And this specific refinery here that we're looking at has a capacity of about 250,000 barrels a day. They
So
produce
kind
about 9 million gallons of gasoline every day. So,
yeah.
it's
Wow.
been down, what, 4 or 5 days now. That's 30 million gallons of gasoline now that have been lost. And that
In
is why
inventory.
people, if you're in the Great Lakes, you've noticed prices have jumped because suddenly Monday night there's a lot less gasoline in the market, and this is how supply and demand works. So, and that's what flaring is, essentially burning off. It means that there's something gone wrong, and the good news, at least for being able to track this, is that when this happens, there are filings that are created they are what's happening is ExxonMobil and refineries that operate in Illinois have this requirement
For a
when
hazmat
when
situation.
exactly when there are chemicals being released, when it's an extremely hazardous substance. In this instance, there has to be a event, and you'll notice here that this is happening. One, because, well, where it's coming from is the flare stack, which I pointed out, in that's where the source of emissions is happening, right? They're burning it off. The duration in this specific instance, this was actually yesterday, shortly after I left the refinery, from about 5:20 to 9:15, and the cause was an upset because, like I said, for refinery operates normally, you generally see very minimal flare.
So the question mark that I would have is after the power company, I believe, when I used to live up in Chicago and do broadcasting, even up there, it was ComEd, if I'm not mistaken. Is
That's
that
right.
right?
Yep.
So then the question that I have is after they get these massive, so I'll back up and say for those of you watching and listening, because we've been talking about the visuals that Patrick have been talking about. So I'll describe it now. Is you're driving up and down the roads and you see these really large power towers out there that are carrying really big amounts of electric lines. That's what we're talking about there. The ones that are big steel kind of a situation. And they're called transmission lines, but they are the ones that have collapsed. We're not talking about the little ones along the side of the highway that's like a wooden pole that's kind of been snapped because of a high wind. They can get that replaced in a matter of hours and it's done and over with. We're talking the really big transmission
Yeah.
lines that
So
carry dozens of cables and they're hundreds of feet tall.
I was going to
You,
say, if we want to
you
look
can't
at
replace those easily.
the images here are of the transmission lines that are intact, and this is what happened. So I'll show you. This photo is of the transmission towers, and you'll see a bunch of them. Right, there are some
Mm-hmm.
more. If I were to continue going west, the interstate is to the west, and this is what it would look like across the highway. That's one of
Yep.
those. Now, Matt, it was kind of interesting. While I was down there, I did see some trucks, some ComEd trucks around. They seem to be changing this structure, which is, I believe, um, just metal. I don't even know if it's aluminum or what it is, but
It
it's
would be a steel
steel.
infrastructure,
So it's
yeah, because
steel.
it
So
has
what
to
they're
carry the weight load of whenever wind resistance, but everything's got its
right.
limit.
So the interesting thing part is I saw a semi truck going down there, not with another type of these towers, Matt. They're not going to rebuild this. If you look, as I was riding away from the refinery, they're actually switching to a stronger steel, like a massive beam structure. So they're not going to rebuild these towers. They have been changing this transmission line system. If you go down a mile from this tower, you'll notice that there's a mix of the old towers, which you're seeing here, and the new steel towers, which have a huge, large,
Like a
just one
core.
solid. It looks more like
Yeah.
a cell phone tower, right? The diameter, it's a very large diameter tower, and that's probably going to need a very large concrete footer. but it's probably also much more stable in high winds. And by the way, a friend that lives down in Joliet, he describes where he lives as a wind tunnel. So that could also be part of the calculation here, that they need a tower that can withstand further speeds, because this was not a massive tornado. I believe the winds were rated about 110 miles an hour. It was an EF2. So
But that
110
would
miles,
be enough to pull down a steel infrastructure tower like that. I mean,
right.
again, I worked in radio for years, right? So we had the big broadcast towers, and they're kind of similar in nature to that as far as the materials that are used. The difference is those electric towers don't have something called a guy wire, GUY, and to help offload the weight. They have to be freestanding. So when they get into a wind situation like that, they have to pull on to the resistance, but they also have to carry the wind resistance that the power lines themselves are meeting as well. And then you have a maximum threshold, and then of course you see the collapse. So the question mark that I have is, when they do finally get these large transmission lines back in place and operational, how long is it going to take once the lights are flipped back on, so to speak, at the refinery, for the refinery to even be putting out product again? Well, that's not a 5 minute. Okay, well, the power lights are back
That's
on.
not an extension cord situation.
Exactly. Turn the spigot back on. Let's do this.
Let's get an extension cord going across the highway. Yeah, to your point, I mean, refineries are probably one of the most significant sources of electric consumption around, right? Probably a lot of these service lines are going to have to be restored. And keep in mind, there may be highway closures involved, because this transmission tower involves a highway. So I didn't actually, the line is probably severed. And until they rebuild that tower, Matt, I don't see them fully connecting electricity back again. So step one is having to rebuild the towers. And then step two is connecting the electricity, which got severed, crossing the highway, putting it into the new tower. And then electricity starts flowing through that transmission line. The question is, where would the electrical hookup be at this specific refineries? It more than likely, there may be a substation nearby. The refinery probably has a lot of power equipment. The question is, does it tap directly into the transmission lines that I showed you in that video? In that still image. I don't know that you can really see much from this picture here on where the electricity may run, other than that we see these lines jogging in front of the refinery here, which is in the background. So
it would have to be a multi-substation situation, and just because of the sheer volume of power that an oil refinery and aluminum refinery also takes an exorbitant amount of power.
Those smelters, wow.
The smelters, all of those things require a vast amount of electricity. So you're talking a multi-substation working in tandem with one another situation, no question. That's how aluminum smelters work, lead smelters work. They just require such a vast amount of power. Power companies love to see that if they can facilitate the needs, because they're their number one customer as far as usage. But yeah, this sounds like you guys are, especially in the Midwest, the states that Patrick's talking about, literally his neck of the woods, so to speak. It looks like you may have some problems for a week to, longer. What are your thoughts? I mean, it's hard to gauge, and I understand that, because we have no idea how quickly ComEd's going to be able to get their transmission lines back up. But what does it take? 2-3 days for a refinery to start the moment the lights come back on, so to speak? I mean, it takes some time.
It's quite a process. Like I said, you have to heat up the units. So there's quite a bit that would have to happen. And then it takes multiple days. Like I mentioned, preheating the oven at home takes about a half hour. That oven's very small, right? Preheating units that refine, if you look at the photo here, all these units here, we have a coker here, right here. It looks like the coking tower that can hold tens, hundreds, probably tens of thousands of barrels, while probably that unit specifically could be 75, 100,000 barrels. I don't have the units in front of me. And by the way, typically refineries are made of several units that are smaller, not just one massive unit. So, it depends on how much electricity is stored, Matt. The first thing that they have, as I noticed down there, they have emergency generators that are likely powering pumps that connect to the tanks, so that they can continue. Right. If you look at all these massive storage tanks here on the right side of the image, all of these are probably, or at least most of them are probably partially to mostly full. You can use gravity to pump right? Like water towers. You can use the force of gravity, but these are all on the ground, and the gasoline, the diesel, the jet fuel may have to jump over roads. So there may be pumps that need to be powered. Product is still probably moving with those generators, but as those tanks deplete, in a few days, ExxonMobil is going to be very low on gasoline, and eventually, if power is not restored quickly, there may be a time when all those tanks are empty. To answer your question, it probably, once they had full power restored, Matt, like 100% available to them, I would say a refinery of this size, again, depending on the specific units, would probably take somewhere in the ballpark of 3 days to get 75% capacity. That last 25%, that's the tricky part. You need everything operating at temperature.
Yeah.
So the last 25% might take a couple more days. So somewhere
You
in
got
the
to have that
ballpark of,
Goldilocks
yeah.
perfection there to really dial it in to get anything above 75%.
So exactly, it probably would take almost a full week. When a refinery has gone completely cold, that's the problem, right? This was not a momentary loss of power. This is a
No.
complete loss of power for several days. All of these units are cold. All of the units will have to be preheated and heated back up to operating temperature before this refinery can really crank things up at 100%. So,
Now hey, I do have one other question.
yeah,
It was a sudden loss of power. They
yes,
didn't have the opportunity
correct.
to close it down appropriately. Is it possible that the refinery could have sustained
Damage
damage from
assessment.
the tornado or damage just from the power loss itself?
Yeah, power loss, and that's where the flare stack comes in. They depending on if there were surges or how the power went out, there could be equipment that they do have to check for, hidden damage, collateral damage, that kind of thing. Going back to, this is another filing from the refinery. This is the night it happened, the 15th at approximately 22:05, which is 10:05, which is concurrent with the main line hit us in the northwest side of Chicago around the same time. Duration, power, 20 minutes out, still going, cause power went out. So, yeah, I mean, it's been several days now. Yes, proper safety precautions, shutting down. That is the event that they took. I mean, I would hope that, Matt, at some point in the next 2 to 3 days, that this transmission tower, by the way, when I was down there, this is definitely, ComEd is all hands on deck for this. There were probably no shortage of maybe 10 to 15 different ComEd trucks. This is a transmission line. This is a major loss in their grid, so that this is where they have resources. The question is, you can't really run damage assessments at a refinery until you have power restored and you can start going through it. And that is why the total return of this refinery may be in late July. It's
Now, I'm going to
take a
throw
while.
one thing that you haven't mentioned, and I don't even know if you thought of it, but I'm going to throw this out there as well. Keeping in mind such a large power generation, there's also, you have to realize there are power plants that
Right.
also have to dial back their capacity because
Yep.
they are not able to send that capacity anywhere, and that also takes time to ramp up. Once you have that an emergency situation where the power lines are severed, it is not often that major transmission lines like this are severed. It happens, but it's not often. But the
Yep.
power company has to react to that as well, and when they're generating power, all of a sudden a massive quantity of power that they have to generate is no longer needed, and you can't just keep producing that power. You have to dial back the power generation grid as well.
Exactly.
And so then whenever the power lines are restored, you have to ramp up, which also can take some time, depending upon what type of refinery it is: natural gas, coal, other types of power generation units, nuclear. I don't know exactly what they would be using there in the Joliet area, but you have a process there. It just takes time.
Yep.
So you have so many things. Now, once they run out of fuel or run low on fuel in those large tanks, and they get up to maybe 75% capacity, that doesn't mean that they're going to be able to refill those tanks super quick either. So you're looking at a kind of a domino effect at this point, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yeah, you really are. And pulling up the outage map, this is exactly the transmission tower that went down here, which is serving approximately 9 customers. You'll notice that. Look at this. So, Matt, they're hoping that by the end of the day today that they'll be back online. To highlight how big of a severe disruption this was, this is today. This is 5 days after 4 or 5 days, not quite 5 days after the severe weather rolled through. They still have 4,000 customers without power in this region. And of that, about 4 million total customers, but they are still not expecting this to come back online till later today. So, let's say, for
Hmm.
example, Matt, that this is the situation for this Joliet, this ExxonMobil refinery. If they get power back online tonight, the restart process will probably take Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. They might be fully back online or close to fully back online by next weekend, maybe, if things go really well. But that doesn't include damage assessments, right? Which could be 1 to 3 days time. So that could push you right into the timetable that I mentioned, real late July.
Yeah, I mean, how, in realistically speaking, how can you fully determine whether or not the equipment is damaged until power has been restored to it to run your tests and
Right.
your simulations before bringing it back online? You can do a physical inspection,
Yeah.
like if the tornado had done some type of damage in that regard, but I mean, if the power
If
is
there's a
off, you can't
surge, yeah.
you can't flip the switch. It won't do anything till the power's back on. So
Right.
how can you even do your assessment on that?
You
So
really
it's
you really
probably
can't. But
difficult.
but
Yeah.
what they're probably doing behind the backdrop is resetting everything, making sure that when power comes back online, they may be using emergency power to reset the situation as best they can. By the way, similarities again to the CrowdStrike outage is the best you can do is kind of be prepared for when the outage is over. You need to reset the processes, right? Like the airlines all lost their networks, right? There was a ground stop the FAA issued. So again, you need to kind of get your A game. You need to be prepared for when things are disrupted, but then you also have to have a plan for how you get things going again, right? This is kind of a locomotive. It's going to take a lot of momentum to get this thing going again. And then as it starts gaining speed, then things start really picking up. So hopefully, Matt, this is not going to be a long outage. But having said that, now to look at the retail price side of things here, we're in the very early, really hours of what we've been watching here, which is the Chicago average, as you can see here, is starting to go up. It's only up about 4 cents, but I do expect that this is going to move up much faster than that. And we did see, by the way, the entire Great Lakes is also seeing that. Indiana is also seeing increases. Yeah, look at Indiana. The averages are just catching up here, and there could be further hikes. The wholesale price of gasoline is up 50 cents a gallon, Matt, and that's simply
Hmm.
because, again, we've lost 9 million gallons of gasoline today. Now, a lot of folks have been asking me, who's the winner in this? Well, ExxonMobil's the biggest loser. They have a plant that's not producing anything. ExxonMobil is likely having to buy gasoline from other refineries because they have contracts that they need to meet. They have to have gasoline from somewhere. And the wholesale market, all the other refineries that have access right now, Matt, are probably operating at 100%, simply because there's a dire need for gasoline whenever a major refinery goes down. So the big winner here, inevitably, is other refineries. The biggest loser here is ExxonMobil because they have nothing that they can sell and they're losing money. Time is money. Who's assessing prices? Why do prices go up? Well, Matt, think of suddenly you're shopping for a home in Florida. It's a very hot market. What if suddenly we'll say 15% of the houses just disappeared from the market overnight,
Yeah.
right? That would likely boost prices up. So this is economics. This is not oil traders. They're not making any money, any additional money here. Oil companies are not the benefit. Well, they are the beneficiaries, but prices are going to recede again. So this will now BP's Whiting refinery. They've had their fair share of problems this year. In fact, so badly they've shared that in their earnings reports. But other companies are temporarily doing better because the wholesale price of gasoline has jumped based on this outage. But a couple weeks from now, prices should be declining in all these states.
All right. Now, moving on to just a couple of other topics. I know we've spent, this is a very, very important thing. And by the way, just because it's not happening to you today doesn't mean that a hurricane can't create the same exact situation in the South. It doesn't mean that an earthquake or some other disastrous situation can't have an impact out west in Colorado or California or Colorado, I suppose, but California, Washington, and Oregon. This is literally a blueprint of what can possibly go wrong in all the wrong ways, if you will, in
Yeah.
no matter where it happens to be. But so keep that in mind as well. So very quickly, let me talk to you about a couple of other things here. Number one, as we are recording this, we're experiencing a massive IT outage of some sort. Where I'm thankful we were able to remote in with one another.
Yeah.
We may figure out that we have some other challenges even in trying to upload. We're about to find out. But then if you are hearing or seeing this program, we were successful. How about that? So the other thing that I have questions for are you seeing any issues with regard to this outage, even trying to pay at the pump? Are there or any other type of
Yep.
situation behind the scenes?
Well, there are anecdotally hearing on social media that there are some gas stations that are having difficulty accepting payments. Keep in mind, some of the big banks were also impacted by this outage, so that could, in theory, lead to credit card declines. It may only be some networks, so it may only be some issuing banks, right? Because the way credit card sometimes
Mm-hmm.
works is it will get an approval from your bank, and if that approval doesn't come back, then that card may be rejected. So and it could affect some payment networks unevenly, meaning that one station the credit card machines may be down, the others may be up. The good news is that there's an issue that's been the issue's been fixed, right? A patch. This has been pulled. The software update that caused the bug has been pulled. A fix has been deployed. But it really is contingent, Matt, on the IT policies of the companies that are running the software, how quickly they can get their entire systems up to date. So you may notice a little bit of funny business when it does come to accepting credit cards. You may have a little bit of difficulty today, but I think as we progress through the day and the weekend, that these issues should largely be sorted out across much of the country. And by the way, Matt, kind of backing up here into where prices are, because we really haven't talked about that for most of the rest of the nation, flaring aside. Gas prices are actually in a little bit of a downward slump here. I won't say it's plummeting. Prices down gently, 3 cents in the last week. We're down now a nickel in the last month. Up a nickel from the last month, but we're also down a nickel from a year ago. Quickly looking at some of the biggest movers here in the market compared to a week ago. As I mentioned, the Midwest, right? Ohio's up 17 cents. Wisconsin is starting to jump up. Arkansas, I'm not really sure what's going on there, but most of these, you'll notice there's not a whole lot of red here, meaning that most areas are seeing a decline. Illinois for now is 4 cents lower than last week, but that's quickly going to change because they're
Yeah.
still in the early days. I was looking for Michigan to see if Michigan has now gone up from a week ago. There it is. Michigan's still down a nickel. Again, the price cycling, right? It's because Michigan price cycles that they're lower. If we go to Michigan's gas website here, we're still nickel lower than last week, but look so far today. We're up 2 cents today, and I would expect that to continue increasing. Bottom line here, Matt, is that most areas of the country are still going to see prices declining, with the exception being the Great Lakes, where prices may go up again today. If you are in Wisconsin, Illinois, Indiana, Michigan, and maybe even extreme Western Ohio, I think it's just going to be the states that touch the Great Lakes here. These four are really where prices will probably modestly jump, and they already went up. They could go up again.
Okay, now let me ask you a couple of other things. The Republican National Convention ended as of the time of this recording. In the acceptance speech, the nominee, former President Trump, made the comment, "Drill, baby, drill," talking about crude oil. You have that aspect. Then you have a situation where the other side, and I'm going to go ahead and show this from our friends at NBC News, Biden's family starting to discuss the possible exit from the 2024 race, the 2024 race. We have a lot of stuff going on, and that administration has been more like lithium, baby, lithium. We want EV cars everywhere. So I coined that phrase, not them, but so they're not saying that, just so you know. But nevertheless, you have a very distinctly different analogy of how the economy should be moving forward when it comes to fuel and vehicles. Okay, so nobody's got a crystal ball. Nobody knows exactly what's going to happen, but you could certainly role play. If the Republican administration gets in and they're saying, open up everything, drill, baby, drill, comments and thoughts from you on that aspect, and then I'll also ask the same question on the Democratic side, because they have a different platform that they wish to go in. So talk to us about the Republican side first, and then maybe throw in the Democratic opinion as well.
Well, Donald Trump said, quote, "We have more liquid gold than anyone," end quote, referring to oil. And he's been, very, very obviously been talking about drilling, which sounds great. More drilling isn't bad at all when it comes to oil. It's good. at least to limiting gas prices. But that's where the good news may end, because the president can incentivize oil companies to drill. He can open more areas. All of that is good, bearish for oil. What he can't do is force oil companies to take advantage of opportunities. He can't force. He does not control U.S. oil production. And U.S. oil companies are not going to shoot themselves in the foot by flooding the market with oil. So the president can open up drilling, just like you can teach somebody to fish. It doesn't mean they're suddenly going to be able to do that, or that they want to do that, right? Maybe they want something different. So, to that point, the president can, whether it's Trump or Biden, they can want drilling as much as they want. They can encourage it, but at the end of the day, they don't have control over it. At the end of the day, Donald Trump can say, drill, baby, drill, but the oil companies are not required to drill.
And there's no refinery,
that's still the kink in the chain.
Right.
If you really want to do something about this, as equal as important as oil is, refining it is critical. As we're talking about here, the ExxonMobil refinery going down, suddenly you can have all the oil in the world, Matt, but it doesn't mean that oil is useful. So we still have the kink in the chain here. If you unkink oil production, which arguably is not kinked because we are currently producing record amounts of oil, the next kink in the chain would be refining, because you still have to stick it in a refinery to be processed. So that's where the limitation's been. That's why today, compared to 20 years ago, we talk a lot more about that R word, refineries, than we did 20 years ago, because there's a lot fewer of them.
Okay, so let's move on to the Democratic side.
Yep.
President Biden stays in the race, refuses to leave, as are his colleagues and friends on the same side of the aisle. Many of them are now calling for. That leads to one path. Then you have the option where even NBC News, like I said, is saying that, the family's starting to discuss his possible exit, which could throw into who knows, right? So the Democratic
could throw everything into disarray.
Exactly. So in that, I don't want to call it instability, because quite honestly, that's just democracy at work, right? That's just how we operate in our democracy. The same thing could have happened to the Republican National Convention. It could happen to the Democratic National Convention. So I don't want to sit there and throw out the word chaos in a bad way. It's just, it'll work itself out. But that's really hard for you to predict things as well, because it's really hard to kind of know what happens from that point forward. Does the vice president step up? Do they choose somebody that was not on the radar in any way, shape, or form?
The impact on oil. And we've already seen 4 years of this administration, and you have to expect that the Democrats, no matter if it's Biden on the ticket or Harris or somebody else, their policies are pretty predictable, just like the Republicans are pretty predictable. The Republicans want more oil. The Democrats have shied away from fossil fuels. So, if the Democrats win the election, then it's probably going to be more of what we've already experienced. Although I will say that, as we progress, gas prices have moderated a lot. Russia's war in Ukraine is still a factor, even though it's a small factor. We're still dealing with a loss of refining capacity. So, if the Democrats win the ticket, there's not going to be a huge shakeup. There's just going to be probably 4 years of very similar policies to what is already in the books, which is arguably a net long-term negative for consumers that like low gas prices, because with fewer places to drill, it becomes a little bit more challenging to replace wells that may be tapped out. So it becomes more challenging, and that would likely mean energy prices long-term would be higher. Not necessarily saying how much higher, because it depends on the situation. But Democrat policy being restrictive would likely weigh negatively on oil prices, whereas Republican policy would likely weigh positively in terms of future oil prices. But again, oil companies aren't going to suddenly drive or produce so much oil that the price goes down to $30 and shoot themselves in the foot, right? There's a range, right, of where we see prices, depending on who's in the office.
So if I hear you reading the tea leaves correctly, you're basically saying, no matter what hyperbole you may hear, politically speaking, on either side of the aisle, there's really kind of a bookend on how much of an impact it's going to have in either direction.
Yeah, exactly right. And for those, we mentioned it in a past episode. I'll bring it back up here again. We at Gas Buddy produced an article on this very subject. And if you don't know, you should read it. If you go to the Gas Buddy blog, this is from June 6th. Get the facts about gas prices. We talk about the myths, the realities. This is a great document for people. And look at that.
There's Patrick.
The episode where we spoke on this. So this really will set the truth forward, Matt, and it dives into a lot of the political differences here we're talking about. As we start to wrap up here, there's going to be a lot more of the subject of conversation. We'll continue to keep you updated on everything election related as it goes. And there's going to be a couple more debates, I believe, and we stand ready to keep you up to date on all those debates. And as Matt said earlier, we're still in the middle of hurricane season, so there's a lot of things we'll keep our eye on. But Matt, I think that pretty well does it for this episode. But basically,
are you sure? Because it sounds like we got a lot more. We could go 3-4 more hours if you want.
Yeah, we probably could, couldn't we? There's an endless amount here.
Well, Patrick, thanks so much. I choked myself up right there. Thanks so much for joining us right here on Over a Barrel. I'm Matt McClain, and that other guy, well, he's Patrick DeHaan, and he's awesome because, most of the time I poke fun at him because we've been friends for years, but that's a whole other story. Now, he is awesome at what he does. So thanks so much for everything, and we will again talk with you probably in the next several days, next week, something along those lines. We'll talk to you. Take care.
So long.